Hello, everyone. My name is Gitika Gorthy, and today I am very honored and excited to be interviewing a very special space champion, Dr. Mindy Howard. Dr. Howard obtained her bachelor's and master's of science in industrial engineering in the United States and her Ph.D. in industrial engineering in the Netherlands. Now, living in the Netherlands, Dr. Howard's life ambition was always to become an astronaut. Narrowed down from thousands to the last 200 candidates, she was selected by NASA as a highly qualified astronaut candidate following the conclusion of her PhD. Despite not making it to the final selection of becoming an astronaut, she refused to let her dream go without a fight. Dr. Howard decided to complete her training on what it felt like to be a commercial astronaut while undergoing 6Gs in a human centrifuge. It was then when she saw other trainees struggling in the centrifuge that she saw a need to help commercial astronauts psychologically prepare for the rigors of spaceflight. Dr. Howard harnessed her academic and professional skills to create the first and only psychological space training for commercial astronauts called inner space training in the emerging field of commercial space. In addition, Dr. Howard is working for Blue Abyss Ltd. Is that how it's pronounced?
Abyss,
the world's first commercial astronaut training as the director of inner space training. She is also a guest lecturer at the International Space University. I am so excited to be able to understand how Dr. Howard accomplished so much and is still doing so much in the scientific field. I can't wait to learn more about her journey on a deeper level. Welcome, Dr. Howard. Thank you so much for taking your time out of your busy schedule to really inspire the next generation.
It's my pleasure to be here. Thanks so much for doing it.
Yeah, before we get into understanding, what intrigued you into the space industry and how you really discovered you wanted to become an astronaut, could you tell us a little bit more about your typical day? What is it, a typical is like, it's different every day, of course, but what does it usually run like?
Well, actually, there is no typical day for me, but I guess I'd like to divide my work between what I would call my activities for space and my activities for Earth. So for space, it's essentially about sometimes doing inner space training for clients. So this one-day training, or giving parts of that training to certain individuals, or expanding my business of inner space training and its partners with the space industry. And the earthly activities are doing things like this, like a webinar, giving maybe talks to groups, workshops, let's say, to women in engineering. And so, it could be a number of different things as well on Earth. And at the moment, I have, I would say, a little bit more earthly activities because people are not flying yet. So people are not training as much as they would normally start training. And now these commercial carriers are going to be starting next year. I anticipate that to kind of switch to being more space activities versus Earth activities. So I'm trying to sort of, as a freelancer, keep myself afloat by doing earthly activities, but hopefully that switch to more space activities will be happening soon.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm really glad that you're able to experience, working and interacting with others on a daily basis, whether it be through inspiring others or actually working, medically to help people during with these flights. I think that's amazing. And I also was reading how you traveled around the globe and you've been in 35 different extreme conditioned areas. And I was wondering, could you share your experiences traveling to these different countries and how that was like?
Sure. I mean, it's funny because that was a different sort of world. That was not my space world. That was when I was working for Shell International, as several roles, starting out as a human factors engineer, then turning into a diversity consultant within the company, and then eventually becoming a sustainability manager for some of the businesses within the company. And so I think, I've traveled the entire time, 17 years working for Shell. And yeah, I mean, as a sustainability manager, I had to go and, look at things, like how are we doing, let's say, on an environmental point of view, but also what they call social performance. So in the communities where we operate, try not only not cause harm, of course, but to make things better than what they are. And so I guess I remember a couple, two countries which stood out for me, two experiences in particular. One was when I was in India, and one of the states called Gujarat. Shell had given money because there was a facility there, and they had given money to help, let's say, build in local villages around where we were operating water pumps, so that kids could stay in school and not have to be forced to go home to drink, essentially. And that sort of, that whole idea that, kids, because there was no water pump at the time around the local school, they would have to go somewhere else to go and drink, and it would just get too hot there. So that sort of, that made an impression on me, and how like, a couple $1,000 for a water pump, how that could change the lives of some of the local people there. And I remember just thinking I was going to go visit the school, and someone said, yeah, again, we'd like you to visit the school. And next thing I knew, I was, the kids were lined up kind of 2 by 2 facing each other. And I was supposed to walk through this line. And I was like thinking, what is happening here? Like it felt like I was Lady Di, in the way that they were honoring me. And then all of a sudden, I remember I received flowers, and then this tilaka, which is this Hindu ritual of painting somebody's forehead as a welcome expression of honor when they arrive. And I remember just thinking like, oh my gosh, like, they were just so appreciative, and it was so little, but you just think I would never have experienced that except there, and it starts to make you think about, being grateful for things that you have, and how it puts things into a completely different perspective. And that also, I had another similar experience when I went to Nigeria. And I mean, sometimes like with these cultural issues, you're completely unaware of stuff. Like I always thought that I was more aware than the average person. And I would read up on things, but of course you can't read up on everything. And I remember this one, I was doing a workshop in Nigeria, and this guy, I still remember his name because his name was Moses. And I remember thinking, that's, a funny name. Like, I'm not a lot of people named Moses. And but he was really helpful during the workshop, and he would lay out the food for us. And then when it was time to clean up, he was cleaning up the food, and he was kind of scraping everybody's plates into some tinfoil. And I said to him something like, oh, are you going to make your dog happy with that? That's a nice doggy bag. And then he said, no, that was for my family. And I remember thinking, oh, that, and then all of a sudden you realize like, gosh, you don't even know anything basically. And the perspective that you have is so limited. But it's these experiences that give you a different take on life, and, and humble you at the time. So they still make an impression even 20 years later. Anyway, so those are two experiences, nothing to do with space, but just these cultural differences and experiencing how other people live in a place that you might not be familiar with. It's just incredible.
Yeah, thank you for sharing those experiences. It was truly, heartwarming to see. I mean, first in India, it was really beautiful to see how much like something so little for us is such a big deal. And also in Nigeria, how just that perspective of something that we consider just like, oh, food that we can just throw away because it's just scraps, for someone else, that could be a full-blown meal. So it's just that perspective. And those cultural experiences, I think what makes us, have these unique characteristics and, just make us have a unique life experience. And so I think that's amazing. You've had the opportunity to travel.
Yeah.
I remember I had kind of a similar experience to you as when I went to India for my nonprofit. I did a rocketry workshop for 75 kids who were actually orphans. And I did not realize like the state of living conditions they would be in. I was just like, oh, I'm going to be teaching 75 kids, kind of keeping the perspective of, oh, I live in America, maybe they're kind of similar, right? So, and I go there and their living condition is absolutely like I couldn't even imagine. Like, it was one
Yeah.
bathroom for 6 girls, and it was
Yeah.
a very small bathroom, and I and it was 6 girls at the same time who had to shower because they had like 75 kids in total. So it was crazy to just imagine what they were going through, but it was so
Yes.
amazing to see how they were still so happy and so excited to learn.
Yes. And that's what I thought in the school. I felt like, we're all kind of whining in the Western world that we don't have
Yeah,
this newest computer, to do
yeah,
this, and they're happy to get some old piece of crap computer just to have something. And it's
yeah,
just like, it kind of puts things in perspective of everything, you just think, wow, that's why it's so important for people to go out and travel and see the world
yeah.
and to see basically how other people live somewhere else. You can just learn so much about yourself and about them and everything. Yeah.
Most definitely. Yeah.
So,
And kind of getting to like the question, I think I'm really curious of is what really was the moment where you knew like I want to go into the space industry or I want to become an astronaut? Like what was that moment? Because was there ever like a moment that just clicked in your head?
well, I don't know about a moment, but it's
Yeah.
more a time period for me that I was, and it sounds like I wish I could say it was like this big romantic thing that I watched the lunar landing, and then I thought, yes, I want to be an astronaut. I was not. Yeah, I remember it that vaguely, but that wasn't what made an impression on me because I was pretty young then. But it was. I used to watch a lot of TV and and I still do. But there was a show called The $6 Million Man back in the 70s where Lee Majors was the star of the show, and he was an astronaut, and he got into an accident, and he got bionic body parts, and I thought, wow, he's so cool, he's so cute, I want to go to space with him, and I want to be bionic. And that was sort of like the start of things for the of thinking like, yeah, I want to go to space. This looks like fun. I just pictured him and I holding hands, like you're 6 years
Aw.
old. What do you want? And I thought TV was reality, so why not? And then kind of people said, well, that's not real. Like don't burst my bubble. I'm into this fantasy. And that fantasy was around for a long time, kind of until people said, well, it's TV. But I thought like, hey, why can't I do this? Like I think that's how the idea first happened, was just watching the show and being in love with him. But in the end, I was just thinking like this, even though you've burst my bubble and told me this doesn't exist, still there are astronauts. So why not, try to pursue this? And I guess I didn't have, I didn't really have lots of people bursting my bubble like all the time, but I think I have to say I didn't really have very many people supporting me either in this. I can't remember my parents saying, yeah, go for it. But, they didn't say, oh, you shouldn't do it. But they didn't say like, oh, we'll take you to space camp or some other, it wasn't like they were actively,
I understand what you're saying.
helping me in that way. And I don't know if it's because they didn't think I was serious enough, or maybe it's a phase, or, but, I've had teachers say things like, like that's a boy's job. Like, what do you want to do that for? I remember thinking like, now I think like, God, did he really say that? But yeah, he did. And so I had a couple of those throughout time, but just in wanting to become an astronaut, that was from 6 years old from watching TV.
Yeah,
And
I
then,
mean,
and that stuck. So there was something there that I got triggered, and it was like, I was thinking, this is something that's exciting. Because I always thought, back then, I think the reason why I wanted to go to space was because it was cool. It was action oriented, and that's what I wanted to do, is just fly around and, do fun stuff and not go and have an office job. I thought that sounded terrible at the time. And so that sounded fun and cool. And that was really what was all that was important to me, growing up through my teens. And I think now, if you ask me about why do I want to go to space? Yeah, I still think it's fun and cool, but I think this whole idea has kind of changed as I've matured and heard more about things like the overview effect, which is what some astronauts get when they go and they look at the planet from, let's say, from the moon. Edgar Mitchell was the first Apollo astronaut that kind of mentioned that he felt that he was connected to everything and everyone in the universe. And it was a profound experience, which changed his life forever. And since hearing that, I started to get interested in that. And that's been more my drive of now why I want to go to space, to be able to, have something like that happen to me. That sounds like a really profound experience that I'm dying to have happen to me at some point. So, and then that's the question is also with these, like, we can talk about it, but these commercial flights, they're so short. Can you have this experience? But that's a different story. But yeah, that's the motivation now, is for the overview effect to happen. So to me, that seems spectacular, to experience.
Yeah, and definitely what you were saying about like the media effect, when you were a young student just, or like young girl just watching TV and you got like inspired or, you're like motivated. I think that's really powerful statement because I feel like a lot of individuals get, influenced by the media, and which is why I'm excited about commercialization, because that puts space more often in the news and people are like, oh, what's going on there? Or they suddenly turn on the TV and a rocket's launching. Like that's pretty cool to just see, and people could get really inspired by that. And so I think that's amazing. And also the overview effect. Yes, I've heard of it. And I think one day just experiencing that itself is it's going to be really cool. And also, you were mentioning how like, you're a lot of people were kind of questioning whether that was a job for girls. And, it's kind of funny how I personally have also experienced when I would talk to people about aerospace medicine, not people in the space industry, of course, but people outside of the industry in my community or my teachers be like, hey, I'm interested in this. They'd be like, whoa, that's really cool. But is that like is that a real career? Or is that something that's like, you can actually get a job in, like, they were confused, and I totally understand they're not in the industry. So they just might have been curious, but obviously there's that like, self-doubt that they create, or like that doubt that they try to put upon you of whether you can do it. And it's surprising that it still exists, but I'm so glad there's like women actually paving the way for this to happen, including yourself. So, thank you for what you're doing to break those stereotypes and, inspire the girls and other minorities.
Hopefully by the time you get to space, there won't be stuff like this happening and people questioning women like this, because enough already.
Yeah.
It's like, it really, I mean, if you think about like, like in the 1960s, the Wally Funks and the stuff that they had to go through.
Yeah.
And you think like, wow, you're even qualified, and then like the NASA says no. And then you think about, what? How is this possible? Like, and that was the times then. But still, it's better. But we're not there yet. The fact that we're still getting comments like this shows we're not there yet. So hopefully by the time you get there, others do not have to experience this. Yeah.
Yeah. And how did you, overcome this, a challenge, or just not being selected as, the final selection to become an astronaut? How did you overcome that? Like, you probably felt really bad, like, oh, I was so close and I couldn't make it. How did you deal with it? And how did you overcome from that? And, still found, inner space training, which is, it's so cool what you're doing. We'll talk about that a little bit later, but I'm curious of your thoughts on that.
Well, yeah, overcoming, like I always felt like I had to prove my worth as a woman in the field of space, more than men do. Like men, nobody questions men doing what, being astronauts, but it's always like, if you mess up or you do something, like you feel like you're messing up for female kind, and then it's much more weight on your shoulders. And in fact, that actually takes, I mean, there's actually it's called the stereotype threat. There's actually a term for this, where even women performing in STEM fields will underperform because of the fact that they always feel this extra burden that men don't have to experience. So they're worrying about, not only do they have to perform well and get everything right, but they think what if I don't? And then all of the energy that goes into kind of proving yourself actually takes away from the main focus of what you need to be doing. And often, statistics shows that you do women, or in this case, women, or whoever the minority is, underperforms because of that extra burden on them. So yeah, it's something that's always there. I have to sort of say to myself that, I'm not doing this for all womankind, but I kind of feel like I am still, I tell other people this, but if I'm honest, it's tough to get over that, because you want to you want to kick ass, you want to do well, and you want to show like, look, we can do this also. It's not like like you need to feel sorry for us, or you don't think we can get the job done. So yeah, I mean, overcoming obstacles. I think part of it is being a little bit stubborn. Part of it is like, if you tell me I can't do something, then I'm going to really try to do something. So it's like, I'll show you. So part of that's personality, and so that's kind of like, if you hit me, I'm going to come back up and try harder, So, but it's discouraging. I mean, like, there was a couple of times in my career, and still it's a career filled with, in terms of space up until now, like a lot of disappointments, like getting down to the last 200 people for NASA, then not getting selected for, because it's unlucky, they have too many good people, and then they just randomly pick people to get medically tested and then go on for the training. So 1 in 10 people will get selected, but all 200 people are qualified. They just have too many good people. So, and then I thought, okay, what else can I do to become an astronaut? Well, maybe since I was in the Netherlands, if I became Dutch, I could apply to the European administration. So, twice as many opportunities to get into space. And so that's what I did. So I became Dutch, and I got another citizenship, applied, and I was told at that time that they weren't accepting astronaut applications in the European Space Administration until 10 years later. And then I was deemed too old, because they had an age limit, believe it or not, at 37 at that time. And now they've switched they still have an age limit, by the way, but they've moved it to 50. And I applied again this year, and I was told again, I'm too old, because I'm 56. So yeah, it's like, there's this happens all the time. And it's the question of like trying to get up and figure out another way. Now, what's interesting is, to me, I think it's interesting that, the whole commercial space field did not exist. So the only way you could become an astronaut was via NASA or the European Space Administration, or Indian, whatever, Space Administration. So you had very limited numbers of ways to get there, and you had to be the right nationality, or else you would have no chance. Like, so that it seems so unfair in a way. But I would never have realized back when I was 6 or 7 that commercial space would be, even there as another way to get into space. And that's what's kind of cool, that people say there'll be jobs that we can't even imagine now in the future. Like these jobs don't exist yet, and yet that'll be the majority of people doing these kinds of jobs. So hearing about things like this, like, one cannot imagine where we will be in the future in terms of what's possible out there. So that's kind of cool, that like overcoming obstacles really just had to do with persistence, being a little bit stubborn, never giving up, and not getting down. So like, when I was really down, when I got rejected from NASA, it took about a week to get over, and then the brain started thinking like, okay, what else could I do? So so that that was something, that's just what I do. I just think about, okay, what else can I do? And instead of people saying, like, okay, I guess I'll give it up, like that idea never sort of occurred to me, like, I'll give up. No, I mean, no, it's not in my DNA. So and in fact, so the whole inner space training, how did that come to be? And I wasn't planning on becoming a commercial astronaut trainer. And so, but what was cool was that in 2010, Shell had a reorganization, and they said, okay, who wants to leave with money? I raised my hand, I do. And they said, oh, great, we'll even give you a training to help you secure your next job. What do you want to be? And I thought, okay, this is my time to say this. I looked at the career counselor, and I said, What I want to do now is become an astronaut. And he looked at me like, oh, very funny. Ha ha ha. What do you really want to do? And I said, no, really, this is what I want. And I convinced him to send me away to to NASTAR. I don't know if you know, that's where there's a human centrifuge where pilots and commercial astronauts train to get used to these different G forces. And Shell actually paid for me to go and do this training. So when I was there, I was having the time of my life, and I think also being a smaller woman, it's an advantage from a G-force point of view. So 6 Gs for me wasn't all that difficult, whereas I saw somebody else like looking like that, freaking out, screaming. And I remember thinking, that's interesting. How come it's so easy for me and he's, in a freaking out? So I remember thinking like, that's interesting. Not everybody reacts in the same way. Is there a training to help mentally prepare people to stay calm for their commercial flight? And they said at NASA, no, that doesn't exist. And I thought, that's something I think I could maybe whip up. So, with the help of a few people who I knew who had some, background in mindfulness, and including Dr. Edgar Mitchell, the guy I mentioned, Apollo 14 astronaut, 6th man to walk on the moon. He also helped me set up my business, because part of what I'm teaching people is how to create the conditions in your brain to be able to be to have the overview effect happen. So that's something that you need to kind of prepare for ahead of time, because if you're freaking out and or panicking or like that, you're not in the good frame of mind, this overview effect will not happen. It will only happen, there's no guarantee that it will happen even if you are calm, but it certainly won't happen if you're in a panic state of mind. So one of the skills that we're teaching people is basically how to create those preconditions in your brain of how to have the overview effect happen. And one can argue like, well, one of these commercial space flights might be too short of a period of 4 minutes of weightlessness. And I don't know, to be honest. It could be, maybe you're better off, like on one of these space perspective flights, for example, which is 6 hours long, not like crazy G forces going on, and you can have some kind of glimpse of the planet. You have a higher likelihood of having the overview effect if you prepare your brain for that. But yeah, the jury is still out. We haven't had enough people flying, enough people trying to have the overview effect, and some saying I tried it but it didn't happen, and trying to figure out why. So there's a lot we can learn still from these flights when people start to fly. I think I gave you a long answer.
No, you answered 2 questions in one.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and I do have to I have a few comments, because when you were talking, I was like, oh yeah, this and this and that. So there's so much going on. But definitely what you were saying about when you were doing, you had to overcome your obstacle of becoming an astronaut, and even though you didn't get selected as a final one, you mentioned how you were always persistent and you always kept trying, and you kept proving people and being like, okay, I'm gonna still try, I'm not gonna just let it go and give up. And I think that's such a powerful mindset, because a lot of times, as a high school student myself, I see people just giving up all the time and being like, oh, I'm bad at math, I'm not going to go into a math field, I'm going to switch over to English or history. And people just give up really easily. And just to see your strong mindset is just it's really inspiring for students to really follow what they love, because you're going to keep trying no matter what, and one day you'll figure out what you really like. And your journey founding in inner space training, I think that's just, you found a problem and now you're trying to find a solution to it, or help people, kind of addressing a gap in the industry. And I think that's what it's all about, just finding that gap, making yourself unique and useful in the industry. And I think that's absolutely, I consider yourself a really huge successful role model, woman role model. So I want to thank you for that, because your powerful mindset, it provides me kind of confidence to do the same thing as I grow older as well.
That's so nice of you to say. Really, thank you. And I have to say, you know, people of my generation might have a little bit of an advantage in the persistence uh, idea more than your generation. Your generation, you know, a little bit of this, I don't want to generalize, but like Instagram, everything's gonna, you know, you see instant success of people and people think like, of course I could do whatever I want in 1 week, you know. It's like, no, you know, like we came from the time, you know, where like if you wanted something, like, you know, you had to wait for it eventually, you know, like to look it up first in the encyclopedia, and then like you guys got it like so quick now. And so I think it's helpful that I've had to suffer, you know, everything being much slower in the past. And then I think like things don't magically happen. But I think nowadays, you know, you do see a couple of people that like become instantly successful, and everybody thinks, oh, that's it, I want to become instantly, and if it doesn't work in a week, you give up. So there's kind of like, you know, we can learn from each other, you know, with that happen. Like it's, okay, I'm not saying it has to take, like in my case, like 50 years for your dream to happen, but not like different. A week either, you know. So it's kind of something in between, I think, with some persistence and, you know, no pain, no gain. That was sort of like what we grew up with. Like we kind of expected that, you know, the process is going to be a bit painful, from at least from the patient's point of view, not getting what you want as soon as you want it. You know, it's but I never doubted that it wouldn't happen. But it was, yeah, it was always tough to sort of like think, oh, there's another blow, you know, wah, wah. Try again, you know. So hopefully you don't have to experience as many wah, wah moments. But yeah, it's, you know, don't be surprised when it happens, and it doesn't happen instantly, because it just doesn't, you know. Everything is, especially with these big organizations like NASA, they're so slow and bureaucratic, and yeah. Anyway.
Yeah, no, I completely understand, and I think that's definitely just like keeping that in mind as we tackle on our next, like our goal, or what we really want to do, a long-term goal. I think that'll be important. And I really do hope like one day I can see you in space, you know, being like either a commercial astronaut as well, because I feel like right now the opportunities are endless. And right now we're sending a lot of very narrow audience to space, you know, without commercialization. It's the most healthiest, like specific nationalities are in majority, and just more
it's
male.
The usual suspects. Right, you know,
exactly.
the white men, Americans. That I mean, yeah, I agree. Yeah. Totally agree. And we need more diversity. We need ways to encourage more diversity, and that, you know, it's basically money at this point. Like, how do we get people who are diverse also to have the means to be able to first get themselves? But, you know, in my case, for example, you know, it's not about the means. It's about, you know, if you can find a way, like a gap in the market, you know, things are going to be opening up, and they're, you know, I'll be going to space, not because I'm going to pay for it, because somebody else will pay for it, you know. And so it doesn't always have to be, you know, paying for it. So there are other ways, but you got to be clever. You got to be like, okay, this didn't work, let's try this, you know, and maybe that will be the way. You don't know. Got to just 100%. Try.
Yeah. And you were also mentioning how like we don't know what the jobs are going to be in like the next 20, 30 years. And I think that's like real. I'm a huge advocate, like, you know, currently in school myself. I'm like, okay, I feel like the school systems really advocate, like figure out a job you want. But I think it's more about like the skill sets as well, kind of figuring out what you love to do, and not necessarily a job you love to do, because the market is, so many jobs are going to open up. You can't prepare for a job that might go out, you know, some like robots could probably do your job in the future. You want to be prepared to like, you know, have those skills to do something bigger. So I definitely agree. I'm so excited. Just like in the past 20 years, so much has changed. So in the next 20 years, just imagining what's going to happen it's exciting. And so that kind of leads me to my next question is, based off of your experience, you know, what do you see will change in the aerospace industry, and what makes you excited and what makes you nervous?
Change is needed in the industry. Well, I mean, aside from more female and non-white role models, because that, you know, I'm hoping that's going to be happening more and more. So we don't have the, like we said, the usual suspects. But I think, the fact that more and more people are having, opportunities to work in the space field, not just get themselves as an astronaut, to space, but all of the things that go around it, like the pyramid and the iceberg. On top we see the visible, image of space, which is the astronaut, but underneath there's a whole organization of people, that are supporting these individuals that are getting there. So, and there's so many things that we're going to be living in space. We need, people who understand, how we eat, how we do everything in space, and these jobs never existed before. So, like you said, their jobs, some things we could start to imagine, and they're, NASA's thinking about, these kinds of jobs, but there are other things that, until we get to Mars, we don't even know what we're missing, so that, like, oh yeah, we never thought of that before. We need to figure out a way to do XYZ, or train someone to, so these, you don't know what you don't know. So there's still, I think there's the great news that things are expanding very much. And if one, as you said, has a flexible skill set, then, you have a higher chance of fitting more things. So that makes sense, because that's the other thing, if you're kind of saying, this is the way I want it to be, I want this job and it's got to look this way, you kind of fit yourself too narrowly into a place that might not exist, but if you say, actually, I'm up for anything, because if I can use, these skills, that can fit in a lot of different places. And I have to say also, I have, most of the jobs that I've had have been telling the organization about, why my skill set is something that they should have if they don't already have it already. And if they do have it, they totally need another one. And if they don't have it, they need me. So, so that's how I got my NASA internship. My graduate student researchers award was by actually sort of convincing people of this. And they were like, yeah, I never thought about that. And they created a job for me that didn't exist. And same thing that happened at Shell. There was no human factors engineering. I said, of course you have this. And they said, no, we don't. I'm like, well, you need to get one. And, they were like, oh, okay, we'll create, and they created this position. So I think there are things that, like, if you're really passionate about what you're doing and it doesn't exist somewhere else and you think it should exist, go and tell somebody, why don't you guys have, something like this where you are? And then maybe someone hadn't even thought about it. So, it's, and that is how I got practically every single job I've ever had, is by kind of telling people, of course you need me, like, you don't have a XYZ, human factors engineer, you don't have a mental trainer, you don't have a, like, of course you need that, and then they'd be like, oh yeah, maybe I do need that. So it's funny how that happens. But I feel like I forgot the other part. Oh yeah, the other part of the industry. What concerns me in the industry is the fact that I don't want commercial space to be just like a joyride for the rich. This would be a missed opportunity completely, because these trips that people will be taking next year and onward can be used really to inspire people, to improve life back on Earth. And I think, you shouldn't be allowed to go to, a trip to space, first of all, and at the very minimum, offset your emissions of going to space, because, there's a lot, there's a lot of CO2 and other emissions that are used in going to space. And if you don't offset that, I think that's really irresponsible. So I think personally, every trip from every person should be having, like, they should be, it's supporting environmental or social projects, but it's certainly environmental projects like tree planting, wind park farms, something on Earth, that also gets improved. So it's not just like about you and your fun ride to space and your selfies, but it's actually saying, listen, yeah, I mean, I can maybe have the overview effect, which could then inspire, I can bring that back to Earth and inspire other people, in addition to maybe offsetting my emissions, but also doing some social projects here on Earth, like, like a water pump in India, for example. I mean, like, there's so many things that can be done to help improve life here on Earth. And I think, the visibility that people will be getting in the future by going on their space flights, they really need to make these trips, let's say, like they could become a new space ambassador for here at life on Earth as well. And if they don't take the opportunity, like right now, nothing is, it's not mandatory to do this. I've brought it up to, I think, Virgin Galactic a while back to say, hey, what about this as an idea? And it didn't get a lot of interest, but I personally think that when I go to space, I will be doing something like this. But I really think, it should be every single person needs to do this if they go to space. It's kind of like, it's part of the deal. It's not just pay your money and go and have fun like you're an amusement park ride. It's not that. It's much bigger, and it needs to be sort of, used for a different kind of platform, for a bigger platform than just a joyride. That's what I think. And yeah, hopefully more and more individuals will do that, and these space companies will have this as a standard sort of thing for individuals. But at the moment, I'm not yet seeing that. So that concerns me.
Yeah, and thank you for that perspective, because honestly, that's a very unique response, but something that seems so obvious almost, especially about what you were saying about using these trips to have a purpose beyond just, maybe like your own enjoyment, something that you can bring back to the people. Because I'm a huge advocate, and I always tell people, because they're like, why billion-dollar investments in space? And I'm like, there's so much value in investing in space because you can bring that back down on here on Earth. And, personally, because I'm interested in medical research, last year when I was an intern at NASA Ames, I did research on like the fruit flies and how their cardiovascular system was in space. But then I tried to like bring that research that I did back down to applying that to understanding the human cardiovascular system and those diseases at human space. So there's applicability into space technology, technology here on Earth, medicine in space, medicine here on Earth. And I think just finding those parallels is so important. And, having a purpose on all your missions is very critical. So I definitely have to agree with you.
No, yeah, a purpose, you can have your purpose is like an onion. You have your sort of like, I want to go and, have fun in space, but then it's bigger. And then you have the bigger purpose, which is really to help life back on Earth. So you have several purposes, I think, for going, and not just only the little core, selfie moment or whatever it is. So yeah, I think we can make these things quite positive for everybody else who's not going to space, if we want to. But the will has to be there. So we got to get out of that egotistical mindset and start thinking about everything that the overview effect could give, which is this connection that we're all, linked to each other in a bigger picture. And yeah, just to sort of realize that everything can be used for the bigger picture, the big, capital B, big.
Yeah. And, taking in your advice as well as your experiences and your insight, my last and final question, which I ask every person who's on this podcast, because, you guys are huge inspirations to me, and I'm sure many others out there, is what advice would you give for young students in maybe middle school or high school or beginning of college, trying to get into the STEM industry, space field, really anywhere, something that you wish someone told you when you were their age?
Yeah, I think never giving up on your dream is definitely, or your passions, and to pursue that, because they're going to continue to give you joy as you pursue them, and actually, being enjoying what you are doing in the present is so much more important, because we always think like life will be better after I achieve my dream. But your dream is actually one little snapshot in time, and the rest of your life is the journey to get to your dream. So if you're only focused on the result and not on enjoying the whole process, you're going to spend more time not enjoying the process, and and maybe that little moment in future. So I think it's I say never give up on your dream, and having that focus is good, but still staying in the present and enjoying what you're doing in the present is what's going to give you the most joy in life, I think. And I need to remind myself of that as well, because sometimes I think like, well, what if? So, but it's a lifelong process to keep, to still have the future view, but to be also here in the present at the same time.
That's perfect advice just to always keep in mind as we're trying to get to our goals. I want to thank you so much, Dr. Howard. I really had a great time speaking with you today.
Me
and I learned
too.
so much, and I feel so empowered already, just like, through this virtual conversation. And I want to thank you just from like a LinkedIn message where you got back to me and you're so open to just talking and sharing your journey with others. And I just want to thank you. And hopefully I can see you in space one day. I think that's going to be exciting. So thank you for your time.
And maybe I can see you in space too.
I
would love
awesome.
that.
Yeah, thank you for your time.
A pleasure.